Imagine losing someone you love deeply, a family member, a son, the pain, the heartache. It's something no one should ever have to experience. But what happens when that personal loss is turned into a storyline? When the grief, the mourning, the raw emotions are filmed, edited, and turned into content for TV ratings? That's exactly what happened when Cody and Robyn Brown from Sister Wives tried to navigate the death of Cody's son, Garrison. And honestly, it left us all asking, was this truly about honoring his memory, or was it just another way to keep the cameras rolling? In the most recent episode, the Browns set out on what was supposed to be a pilgrimage to Wyoming, a moment of reflection, of remembrance, a chance to mourn and process Garrison's passing. But instead, it felt more like a stage trip, a spectacle to draw in viewers rather than a heartfelt tribute. There was no real focus on Garrison. Instead, we saw Cody and Robyn, almost as if they were performing for the camera, using the death of a loved one to advance their own emotional narrative. It wasn't about Garrison, it was about them. And that's the problem, isn't it? When grief is used as a tool to boost ratings, to stir emotions for entertainment value, it feels disingenuous. In today's video, we're going to break down exactly what went wrong with this pilgrimage, why it felt more like a self-serving act than a genuine moment of mourning, and how the Browns seem to be rewriting their history with Garrison, not out of love, but out of convenience for the cameras. You won't want to miss it, because what we're about to uncover is more than just a bad TV moment. It's a commentary on the ways reality TV can distort real-life pain. Stay with me. This is going to get interesting. Let's start by acknowledging who we're dealing with here. Cody and Robyn Brown, the faces of Sister Wives. On the surface, they seem to be navigating the ups and downs of a complicated polygamous family, but underneath it all, there's a much darker, more self-serving side to their actions. Over the years, Cody has come across as the man with the answers, the one who's always trying to hold it all together, even though, let's be honest, things have rarely seemed truly together. And then there's Robyn, the second wife turned first wife, a woman who's had her own set of controversies, from being accused of playing a role in the dissolution of Cody's marriages to the other wives, to her sometimes overly dramatic portrayal of events. But when it comes to real, raw emotions, like grief, do they rise to the occasion? Or do they use it as another tool for their public personas? The death of Cody's son, Garrison, was a heavy moment. Losing a child is every parent's worst nightmare, but how did Cody and Robyn handle it? Well, let's just say their reactions didn't exactly feel like they were driven by genuine sorrow or mourning. Instead, it seemed as though the whole situation became less about Garrison's passing and more about Cody's personal journey through grief, his emotions, his struggles, and ultimately, his need to be seen as the grieving father on TV. That's where the problem lies. From the very start of the episode, Cody's grief takes center stage. Robyn, too, frames the death in terms of their own experience. There's a noticeable lack of focus on Garrison as an individual, his life, his legacy, the loss of him as a person. Instead, the cameras follow Cody and Robyn, as if this pilgrimage to Wyoming is more about their own emotional catharsis than anything else. It's almost like Garrison's death is being used as a backdrop for their own personal drama. Now, I get it. Grief is a personal journey and everyone experiences it differently, but there's something deeply unsettling about how this was portrayed. As the camera zooms in on Cody, we see him talk about his feelings of loss and his attempt to make sense of it all, but it quickly turns into a spectacle. Just another chapter in his long-running quest to reshape his image as the devoted father and husband. It's like the death of his son isn't just a tragic moment for him, but an opportunity to present himself as a man torn apart by grief, someone who's finding it hard to process, but ultimately doing it for the sake of his family's legacy. And then there's Robyn, who steps in with her own commentary. Her words are mostly focused on Cody's experience with grief, how he's processing it, what he needs, and how she's supporting him. At no point does she seem to center Garrison as an individual, a son, a brother. Instead, it's all about Cody's emotional needs, his struggles, his healing. We rarely hear Robyn acknowledge the person Garrison was, what he meant to the family, or how the rest of the Brown children might be feeling. It's like she's speaking from a place of wanting to be the emotional support for Cody, not genuinely grieving the loss of a young man who, by all accounts, had a complicated and somewhat distant relationship with the rest of the family. This is where it starts to feel more like a performance than a genuine reaction to grief. It's as if Garrison's death has become a storyline, a plot point to move the narrative along, rather than something truly personal to the Browns. The reality here is that this is a family tragedy, yet the way it's filmed, edited, and presented for public consumption makes it seem more like a sad, scripted storyline for the next season of Sister Wives. It's tough to watch, because it feels like the grief is being manipulated, not just for the sake of ratings, but also for Cody and Robyn to gain sympathy from viewers. The loss of Garrison should have been a moment for reflection and respect, but instead, it's turned into just another dramatic scene, another opportunity to put their emotions on display, to keep people talking, to keep them glued to their screens. And let's be real, this isn't the first time we've seen grief turned into a spectacle on reality TV. But there's something particularly unsettling about how Sister Wives has handled it. This isn't just a moment of mourning, it's a moment of self-promotion, disguised as a deeply emotional experience. And honestly, it makes you wonder, is this how Cody and Robyn genuinely process grief? Or is this just another chapter in their ongoing quest to create a narrative that suits their public personas? At the heart of it all is a question that can't be ignored. When does grief stop being real and start being manipulated for entertainment? When is it no longer about honoring the memory of a loved one? And when does it become about feeding the drama machine of reality TV? That's the unsettling truth we're facing here. Garrison's death, his life, his family, they all deserve more than this. More than a storyline, more than a pilgrimage to Wyoming that feels more like an emotional tour for ratings. If you watch the episode, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The infamous pilgrimage to Wyoming. On the surface, it's supposed to be this heartfelt tribute to Garrison, a way for Cody and Robyn to honor his memory and find some sort of emotional closure. But when you really look at it, does it feel like a genuine personal moment of reflection? Or does it come across as yet another stunt to grab the audience's attention? Spoiler alert, it's more of the latter. The whole concept of this pilgrimage feels deeply disconnected from the real purpose of honoring Garrison. The trip doesn't start with a moment of mourning, reflection, or even a genuine acknowledgement of Garrison's life. Instead, it kicks off with Cody talking about his neon sign business from 20 years ago. Yes, you heard that right. Cody Brown, in the midst of mourning his son, is revisiting a business that has absolutely nothing to do with Garrison's death. This is the first clue that this trip has little to do with honoring Garrison and everything to do with reshaping Cody's own narrative. Here's the thing. This trip, instead of being focused on Garrison, is almost entirely about Cody revisiting his past, his business, his regrets, and his self-perception as a father. The scenes in Wyoming feel like a nostalgic tour of Cody's past self, where he talks about his failed business and how he's come full circle. There's a noticeable lack of focus on Garrison as a person. No stories about Garrison, no heartfelt moments that would actually reflect his life and the impact his death has had on the family. It's as if Garrison's death was merely a backdrop, a convenient plot point to get Cody to a place where he can reflect on himself. And then there's Robyn. Oh, Robyn. She's there to narrate parts of the journey, which already feels out of place. Robyn, as the narrator, doesn't give us any deep insights into Garrison's life or the family's grief. Instead, her narration comes off as this detached, almost clinical commentary about how the trip is supposed to help Cody with his emotions. She talks about how Cody is struggling and needs this time to process, but again, there's a glaring absence of any reference to Garrison as a person. She's speaking about Cody's grief like it's the main event, with Garrison's name mentioned almost as an afterthought. Let me be clear. Grief is personal, and I'm not saying that Cody and Robyn aren't allowed to process things their way. But when you're putting it on television, when you're using the death of a family member as a storyline, it's hard not to question the authenticity of it all. It feels like they're more focused on creating a moment that will resonate with viewers than actually honoring Garrison. Robyn's narration and Cody's reflections are constantly centered on them, how this trip will help them, how this is part of their healing process. It's hard to ignore the fact that the show is trying to craft a moment of emotional depth, but it doesn't feel deep. It feels shallow, manufactured, and disconnected from the real pain that should come with such a loss. The further they go into the trip, the more it becomes clear that this isn't really about Garrison. It's about creating a storyline for the show. In fact, the entire trip starts to feel like self-indulgence rather than a sacred moment of remembrance. Cody and Robyn's grief is front and center, but there's little to no attention paid to what actually matters in this situation. Garrison's life, his family relationships, and the profound impact his death has had on the people who truly knew him. By the end of the trip, it's impossible to ignore that what was supposed to be a solemn pilgrimage for Garrison's memory has turned into just another scene in the Sister Wives saga, where Cody and Robyn are once again the stars of the show. The fact that this pilgrimage is even being portrayed as something sacred is troubling, because it shows a complete disregard for the true nature of grief and remembrance. Instead of honoring Garrison and reflecting on his life, the trip is ultimately about how Cody and Robyn want to be perceived as grieving parents. It's a performance. A carefully curated narrative designed to draw sympathy from the viewers, to turn tragedy into entertainment. In the end, this whole journey doesn't serve as a tribute to Garrison. It's not a pilgrimage, it's a spectacle. A spectacle of grief, yes, but a spectacle nonetheless. The trip may have taken them to Wyoming, but it never took them to a place of genuine remembrance or emotional depth for Garrison. What could have been a moment of quiet reflection and honest mourning became just another opportunity to shape a narrative, to capture the kind of emotional content that draws people in, that gets viewers talking, that keeps the show relevant. And in that sense, the pilgrimage feels hollow, disconnected, and frankly, a little bit disrespectful. Let's talk about Robyn. It's hard to ignore her role in this whole narrative, especially when it comes to the grieving process surrounding Garrison's death. As Cody's partner, she's right there with him through this emotional journey, but is she really grieving for Garrison, or is this more about protecting herself and keeping Cody's emotional state in check? From what we see on screen, it sure seems like Robyn's focus is more on Cody than the son who's no longer with them. When we think about how Robyn interacts with the situation, it becomes clear that her concern seems less about Garrison and more about the emotional toll this is taking on Cody. Throughout the episodes, we see Robyn express her worries about Cody's sadness, his struggles to cope, and the deep toll Garrison's death is taking on him. But very rarely, if ever, does she talk about Garrison himself, the son that passed away. There's little to no reflection on Garrison as a person, the kind of life he lived, or the legacy he left behind. Instead, Robyn's comments are almost exclusively centered on Cody's grief, as though the focus of this tragedy should be on how it affects him. Take a moment to think about how this plays out on screen. Robyn, with all her supposed emotional awareness, is consistently narrating Cody's inner turmoil, his emotional struggles, and how hard it is for him to process his loss. She is constantly stepping in as the caregiver figure, making sure Cody is all right, validating his feelings, and smoothing over his emotional pain. Robyn even goes as far as to discuss healthy coping mechanisms in a way that feels more like a defensive shield she's putting up for herself, rather than acknowledging the real, raw emotion of Garrison's loss. This focus on Cody's grief starts to make it feel as if Robyn is using the situation to protect her own emotional state. By keeping the attention on Cody, she avoids confronting the more complicated, potentially uncomfortable reality of the loss of Garrison, a loss that is real and raw, but one that's not fitting into the scripted narrative she's helping to craft. Robyn's role as a narrator, as someone constantly speaking on behalf of Cody's feelings, seems less about processing grief and more about shielding herself and her family from the uncomfortable, messy reality of death. It's as if the deeper emotional complexity of Garrison's passing is too much to deal with, and it's easier to frame it as Cody's journey through grief. In many ways, Robyn's behavior feels almost self-serving. She seems far more interested in managing the emotional tone of the household and ensuring that Cody's grief narrative stays front and center. By focusing on him, she ensures that the show's emotional arc revolves around her and Cody's shared experience, rather than the broader, more painful reality of Garrison's death. This shift in focus feels manipulative, not because Robyn is being malicious, but because it prioritizes their own emotional comfort over truly acknowledging the pain that comes with losing someone who was once part of the family. Think about it. If Robyn were truly focused on Garrison's memory, wouldn't she have shared more about him? Wouldn't she have allowed herself to break down, to share what she actually felt about him as a person, rather than framing everything in terms of how Cody feels? There's a glaring lack of depth in Robyn's narrative. She never tells us what Garrison meant to her, what kind of impact he had on her life, or what it was like to witness his struggles. Instead, we get Robyn talking about Cody's coping mechanisms, how she needs to support him, how she's trying to help him through his grief. It's not that Robyn doesn't care, it's just that her care seems, in some ways, more self-serving than it is about honoring Garrison's memory. By centering the conversation on Cody, she avoids having to dive into the uncomfortable emotional landscape of Garrison's death. It's like she's keeping the conversation in a safer, more manageable space. Cody's feelings, their shared bond, and the scripted family narrative. The reality is that Robyn's role in this grieving process doesn't seem to reflect a true desire to honor Garrison's life or death. Instead, it comes across as a way to manage the emotional impact of this loss for the cameras, for the family, and, let's be honest, for herself. In doing so, Robyn's grief narrative feels disingenuous. It's one that's more about the performance of grief rather than truly acknowledging the depth of the loss. And in the end, it only further isolates Garrison from the story that's being told. Here's something that's been nagging at me throughout all of this. Where are Garrison's siblings? It's hard to ignore their absence in the grieving process. Garrison wasn't just Cody's son. He was part of a larger family unit, yet we see almost no involvement from his siblings during this time of loss. And honestly, that feels like a glaring omission. Now, we could speculate about the complex family dynamics that have always been at play in the Brown family. Garrison had a strained relationship with his father, Cody, especially as he grew older. The tension between them wasn't a secret. Garrison had distanced himself, and frankly, Cody's relationship with him was marked by neglect, at best. So, is it any surprise that Garrison's siblings might have complicated feelings about their father and, by extension, his new wife, Robyn? Is it possible that their absence speaks to the fact that they might not feel comfortable grieving in front of a camera crew or participating in a storyline that doesn't align with their own emotions? But here's the kicker. Cody and Robyn's grief, which they've made the centerpiece of this entire episode, doesn't seem to leave any room for the voices of Garrison's siblings. Where are they when their brother is being mourned? Where's the chance for them to tell their side of the story or reflect on what Garrison meant to them? Instead, Cody and Robyn's portrayal of grief feels almost self-centered, as if their experience is the only one that matters. It's also hard to ignore the possibility that the absence of the other siblings is a deliberate choice. For the sake of the show, it feels like the producers are more focused on creating a singular narrative around Cody and Robyn's emotional journey. The focus on them allows for a controlled storyline, a neat, digestible arc for viewers to follow. But by sidelining the other siblings, the show misses the chance to present a more nuanced, complex view of grief, where everyone involved has a voice. In a way, this exclusion highlights just how much Cody and Robyn's grief narrative is about them, about their relationship, about their emotional journey, rather than truly honoring Garrison's life and death. It's as if the show is asking us to buy into the idea that Cody and Robyn's emotional experience is the only one that counts, leaving the real complexities of family grief unaddressed and out of frame. It's a reminder that, sometimes, reality TV doesn't just manipulate the truth, it selectively erases parts of it to suit a narrative. In the end, what we've witnessed in this episode is the manipulation of a very real, very painful tragedy for the sake of entertainment. Cody and Robyn Brown's handling of Garrison's death wasn't about honoring his memory or genuinely grieving as a family. It was about crafting a storyline, one that centers on their emotional journey, their grief, and their self-interest. The so-called pilgrimage to Wyoming was more about revisiting past business ventures and narrating their personal emotional experiences than it was about truly remembering Garrison. And let's not forget the glaring absence of his siblings, whose voices were conspicuously missing from this narrative.